Thank you very much for the invitation, and it's wonderful to share the seat here on the panel with the very distinguished panelists and everybody we heard this morning, keynote speakers and Honorable Secretary of Coal, and I was very impressed with all the kind of things. I'm in the industry for the last 37 years and still learning. So two things. One is that it's going to be very hard for me and for my panelists to kind of stand here between you and lunch. And it's going to be we will run through and so just want to survey a little bit. How many people who are sitting here who are the transmission control center or operators, transmission operators? See, few. How many of you are in the regulatory or in the policy making? Wow. So if I say something to offend anybody, my intention is not to say anything wrong, but the experiences I have working at Bonneville, so I'm going to be talking about the issues we have integrating a lot of renewables to reduce the carbon footprint as well. So during the lunch break, I'll be available, and for more discussion, we'll go from there. Climate change is a global threat. Is there anybody who doesn't agree with this? Because there are still some people who still believe that it's kind of scientists, technocrats, and other people have cooked up this, climate change is there, but it doesn't have impact. You're going to hear a lot of stuff, read it in the newspaper as well. So I'm from United States, and I'll talk a little bit more about the policy issues there as well. So these are the kind of contributors you have. Human activities, for example, go all over the world. People are cutting forest. So this is going to add to your carbon emission. Transportation sector is the #1 polluter. The energy sector comes number 2. And we should look at what we need to do to clean our own house before we start kind of telling people that what they are supposed to do. Okay, this is the issue of what I see, what I heard. If I was hearing the speakers before I prepared my presentation, I was going to change a little bit, because what I heard this morning that, like coal is going to be still the king, so we should have focused on what the efficiencies we are going to do it at the thermal plants. For example, coal efficiency, clean the beds, sulfur, content elimination, or from the coal moisture elimination. That will add, if I remember correctly, if you do all those things, you will add at least about 7 to 10% efficiencies to your thermal plant. Look at 7 to 10% or less power production by the thermal plants, and look at how much emission we can reduce. So the first issue, I think, is the widespread failure to think about integrated electrical system as a system, because it's broken all the way. Generation is separate, transmission is separate, and then you have the distribution, and then you have the solar rooftop panel and everybody. So nobody is looking at the system as a whole, that how we are going to meet the demand and the requirement for the system. Fragmented industry. So GenCos, DISCOs, RTOs, everybody is kind of doing that. Okay, what is the technology I need to run mine? So it's never ever thought about that, okay, I should be talking to somebody. If I'm doing something in transmission, I know I'm impacting the distribution as well as the generation, but the communication, lack of communication is there. So we need to be kind of establishing those communication protocols. Go back. Jurisdictional issues. What we have back in states, that the states have some rights and the federal entities have some rights, and they are going kind of after each other. And on the 111D, how many people know what a 111D is? That is EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. They issued the order, actually, and we had a lot of issues with that. And Richard and I, we were talking last night, that they created that order in vacuum. They did not talk to anybody who were the reliability organization like FERC, NERC, and anybody who was operating the system didn't talk about it. We need to do this, this, this. That was the order came, and it is still pending in the courts. And I was kind of on the flight, New York Times I was reading, so it's in the Supreme Court as of 3 days ago. It has been challenged in the Supreme Court. Technology-specific advocacy, solar, wind, demand response, nuclear energy efficiencies, everybody is going to where they can get the funding. Without connecting with each other, that, okay, if I'm spending $2 million and nuclear folks can spend $3 million, so if I give my $2 million to offset my requirements, so that discussion is not going anywhere. For example, transmission, you can spend a lot of money in transmission, but if somebody else can defer my transmission construction, so there is no mechanism to pay back and forth. So we have started looking into establishing those protocols. What the system needs, a balanced resource mix, wind, DERs, you have heard everything. It's good to go after a lot of speakers because most of the stuff you want to talk about is always get preempted, so you don't have to focus. We'd like to have it more interactive, so you have more questions. I can go and share with you my experiences. Resource allocation to balance the variable or intermittent or renewable resources. Pump storage, you heard that one. It's a very expensive option. So pump storage itself has a lot of issues because your generation is going to be your load. So once your generation becomes the load, the power flow is going the other direction, and you may not have the reactor support there. So what are you going to do to address those issues? So there are a lot of challenges for each, like nuclear, has its own issues, hydro has its own issues. So we need to sit together somewhere in a room, lock everybody who is in one room and say, you are not getting out till you come to the consensus and the solutions. DER and demand response impact on the system operation. PJM, Terry Boston, he just retired last year as CEO of PJM, and we were in Paris together. He has close to about 11,000 megawatts of demand response. So I asked him the question, I said, how are you using that demand response? Are you using Terry for operations, or you're using for planning? If you're using for operations, then operation folks need to have a contract with the delivery guy who can deliver whenever you need. If you don't, what's the penalty? Because Mr. Sony, if you're, for example, operating the system, right, and then, you're going to need something from me if I don't have a contract with you, if I don't supply, most probably the first hit is going to be on you, not on the other person, if the system collapses. So there are a lot of issues we need to address. That I'm not saying that we should not have DER, demand response. We need to integrate that group into our transmission planning as well as the IRP. IRP should be, I used to call IRTP. It should be the integrated transmission and resource planning, because you can plan the resource. If you don't have the transmission, how are you going to deliver? Beam me up, Scotty? So it's not going to help. Voltage and frequency protection, reserves to maintain reliability. Building consensus. This is very important. When I was putting this slide together, I was saying that policymakers and elected officials, they set the goals. For example, I was hearing and I was reading that 175 gigawatts of renewables in the next 5 years, India's goal. So what you're going to do, we were looking at that slide when it was asked the challenges. It's going to be extremely, extremely challenging because your system is going to be set up for exactly for operation, and there are a lot of other needs you got to. Resource, where your resource is going to be, where your load is going to be, and what is the transmission system you are going to have? What are the transmission requirements? Can you build that transmission? Usually in the United States, it's a 7 to 10 years period, the day you say that I need transmission, by the time you go through the permitting process, land acquisitions, and a lot of other hula hoops we got to jump through, public meetings, and everybody needs to. So if you need the transmission, Mr. Flippy was saying that, yeah, I signed the papers and it got built 14, 15 years after. So it's not going to work. You need to coordinate that system. Somebody throws the resources at me, that here it is, that you have the money and you build a transmission system in the next 2 to 3 years. May not be possible. I have one of my boss, Vicky Van Zandt, most of you may have heard or dealt with her, one of the best intelligent technical senior vice president I have worked with. She used to always say that you need to have, if I'm offending somebody, I apologize already, and I'm going to apologize again. She used to say that, to produce a baby, you need a woman for 9 months, not 9 women for 1 month you can produce a baby. So it's true that, you need to look at the time constraint. What's the time constraint? Can you deliver this one? So this is going to be really, really challenging to build the transmission to suit our resource requirement, how we are going to be delivering. Planning and operational engineers. This is a challenge we had. 2 minutes, okay. Planning engineers usually plan the system, what's the need right now, or the knowledge they have, but by the time it gets, the system is going to be changed. I used to call that planners. They are kind of designing the plane, but when it's going on the test flight, it's never going to be sitting in there. If it collapses, the people who are in the operations take the hit. So we start kind of cross-training both the groups. Universities and our research and development organizations, they need to be really, really upfront to help us. Consumer advocacy group. This group need to be kind of agreeing to what we need to deliver. What do the ratepayer wants? We heard that one, reliable, affordable, environmentally benign. They are not mutually compatible. If it's reliable, it's going to be more expensive. This is a slide you have already seen that by this came from Energy Information Office Administration. By 2040, you will have a 56% increase. And from NERC, Mark Lobby put this one together, that with the resource changes, and this is the resource mix is going to be different by 2030. And challenges for delivery companies. There are a lot of net metering. I'll address on that one, constraints I already. Net metering is causing a lot of issues in the United States for the distribution energies because they're selling, the rooftop solars are selling a lot of power back to the utility and not paying for the distribution cost. So the people who can't afford to put the money in upfront, so they are the one who are kind of, the rates are going up. There are challenges and new tariffs. We need to look at it. Allocation of new resources are changing the flow on the transmission system. Suggested approaches address the impact requirements for the reserve margins. Very important for renewables. So if you look at inks and decks, you got to define what you need it and who is paying for it. This is what I believe in. Progress lies in enhancing what it is, in advancing towards what it will be. So this is you cannot scratch the surface in 10 minutes. I was kind of going all over, and thank you very much for listening to our gibberish, and we are ready for the discussion. Thank you.